In this part of my 10-part series on buying a 10 to 15-year-old Mercedes-Benz, I want to cover some of those questions you'll need to ask the seller when you make that first contact. Let's say you've seen this nice car advertised and, man, this is something I would really like to have, so let's call the owner, or let's email the owner and find out a little bit more about the car. You know, I can't believe how many wild goose chases I've gone on over the years. I mean, for number one, do not believe the pictures. Pictures lie. You can make all kinds of old, miserable cars look really good in photographs, especially if they're taken from 10 to 15 feet away. The other thing is, don't believe the ad. Don't believe what's written in the ad. You know, the ones I just cannot hardly even tolerate are the ones that say, nice old Mercedes-Benz for sale. Call for more information. Well, you know, what are they trying to hide? Okay? So I've learned over the years, after numerous wild goose chases, let me share this one with you that happened about 8 years ago. I was responding to an ad for a 1971 300 SEL 3.5 up in Vancouver, Canada. And I called on it, and he said, well, this car is in really nice condition. I said, what about the rust? He says, oh, there's no rust in the car. And, you know, I was so excited to go see this car because it had been a car I'd been looking to buy. I didn't really, you know, work the questions. I just said, okay, I'll go ahead and drive up and take a look at it. Now, that's a good hour and a half drive by the time you go through the border. And I walked into the garage, and right away the car was, you know, sitting down almost on the ground. So you know, the air suspension was bad, and you walk around the car, a quick walk around, it didn't look too bad. You know, it was going to need a paint job and some other work. So I decided to get on my hands and knees, and I leaned down. I could hardly see underneath the car, and I looked up, and here the rear floorboards were separated from the body. They were rusted out all the way around. And I'm thinking, oh, you got to be kidding me. A 3-hour drive. And here I'm looking at a rusty old pile of junk. And I looked at the owner and I said, you told me on the phone this wasn't a rusty car. I said, have you ever looked down underneath there? The whole floorboards are rusted through. And he looked at me and says, well, I'm sorry, I've never got down there. I have a bad back. And I thought, boy, that really is one of the best excuses I've ever heard. So I've learned over the years to really drill on 10 key questions. Why 10? Well, they just kind of fall in that bracket. I'm sure there's other questions that you could come up with that you would want to ask in that first contact. But I'm going to recommend that you actually make a list. And I'll tell you a little bit later what happened to me just this past weekend, because I didn't make my list. I didn't go by my checklist. I was just kind of in a hurry, and I really wanted to go see the car. So once again, you have that emotion of playing in the equation you have to be really careful of. The very first question I ask is, this is related to general questions that may have not been answered in the ad. And you see this quite a bit, particularly on Craigslist. And that would be, what's the price? What's the mileage? And where are you located? I can't believe how many ads I see that those three basic things are not even included. And you may find out from the price, the location, or the mileage that you don't even want to pursue the additional 9 questions. You say, sorry, that's not what I'm looking for, and just move on. But if, in answer to any general questions that may not have been answered in the ad, then you can move on to number 2, and number 2 is one of my favorites. I mentioned it earlier. I asked the owner, how long have you owned the car? I'll repeat why this is so important. Longer ownership will give you a little bit more history about the car and maybe a little bit more care. That's why everybody loves to buy a car from the original owner, because he's owned it his whole life and he knows all about the car. And if at least he's an honest person, he's going to be able to share with you some of his experience, some of the maintenance that he's done on the car. But if the person's only owned the car a couple months, he may be one of those type of people that's all they're doing. They're flipping cars, you know. I recently drove up to look at this old Mercedes, and I pulled, and he said he owned the car for 2 years. Well, I pulled up to the house, and here were 7 cars out front. Look at this. He had a motor home, he had cars, he had for sales. It was obvious this guy was just a wheeler dealer selling cars. And when he took me out to show me his Mercedes out back that he had owned for 2 years, it was overgrown with grass. So, you know, I got fooled on that one. Once you feel like you got a good feel of the ownership of the car, move on to number 3 question is, how about maintenance records? And we covered that in an earlier video, how important maintenance is when you buy one of these 10 to 15-year-old cars. If he's got maintenance records, that's great. Ask him, if I come and look at the car, can you have all the maintenance ready for me to view? Or you might even ask, if it's a long distance, you might even ask him to scan and send you PDFs of those maintenance receipts if he's willing to do that. Then number 4, you want to ask, is there any damage history and is there any repaint on the car? I like to buy cars, particularly older Mercedes-Benz, that have original paint, that haven't been repainted, that haven't been messed with, because then I know I'm getting what I'm seeing. And this is really important. If they're trying to hide some damage or some rust or something with paint and Bondo, you kind of want to know that before you drive 3 hours to go look at it. And then number 5, I ask, where did the car come from? What's the history? And did this come from some other part in the country? Now, for you international, viewers of this video, I'm talking about the United States here, and we in the U.S. know where the Rust Belt is, and that's generally where they salt roads. And just this past weekend, I went down to Seattle to look at a 2002 ML320. Now, it only had 92,000 miles on it. So this piqued my interest, because he said in the ad it was in excellent condition, the interior was excellent, only 92,000 miles, he had some maintenance records. And when I called him, I forgot to ask the question, where did the car come from? So he rolled it out of the garage, it looked great, and then I opened the back door and I noticed, why is there a little bit of rust around the bolt holding the back seat on? And then I took a close look at the gas door and I saw bubbling of the paint along the bottom lip of the gas door, and I mentioned it to the seller, and he said, oh, that's no problem, you can just buy a gas door for 20 bucks. So I decided to get on my hands and knees, and sure enough, this was a rusty car. And you can see all the rust around all the bolts and fasteners? That is an obvious sign of road salt. And so I got up and I said, can you tell me where this car came from? He said, well, I used to live in Chicago. I brought the car over to Washington from Chicago. I go, oh no. If I would have known that, I wouldn't have even driven to look at the car. Because I know if a car's been in Chicago or the Midwest, East Coast, I'm just going to avoid it. Now that makes it really difficult for you that live in that area. You may have to go outside that area to get a good 10 to 15-year-old Mercedes-Benz, because rust is really high on my list, particularly these 210 chassis. If they're rusty, you just run away. You don't even want to deal with them. And it's not just that, oh, I can fix this little rust here. It's what happens is you have all this hidden rust, and you have all these bolts and fasteners that are rusty, and anytime you do any maintenance of the car, it becomes a huge problem with frozen seized bolts, seized spark plugs, seized lug bolts, and on and on and on it goes. So I got a little fooled on this one because I didn't ask the question, where did the car come from? And then moving on to number 6, I ask, has the car had any recent major maintenance work? Now they may have told you that they had maintenance records, but they maybe didn't give you the details. These cars are going to have 100, 120, 140,000 miles on them. And at that point, that's the time when you're going to need spark plug wires, shocks, obviously brakes, tires, all these things. And if they haven't done any recent work on the car in the last 3 or 4 years and it has 130,000 miles on it, expect that it's going to need some work. That's just the way it is. And then when I move on to question number 7, 7, 8, and 9 are my favorite questions, and I've developed these over the years because I've been fooled so many times by people telling me, hey, what's the condition of the paint? Oh, the paint's excellent. How about the interior? Oh, the interior is beautiful. How about the engine? Oh, the engine runs great. and you go there and the car's a pile of junk. The first of these 3 key questions is actually number 7 on my list. And I'm kind of sliding these questions in at the end here because I want to try to pry the truth out of the seller. Me and my friend who was recently looking for a Toyota 4-wheel drive pickup, he was saying, yeah, people would tell me these cars are great, and I'd go drive a half hour to look at them and they'd be rusty and not even close to how they had been presented. So it's going to be challenging when you ask these key questions. Okay, let's see if we can pry the truth out. Every seller wants you to come and look at their car. I think most people think if they just get you to come and look at their car, that they can kind of twist your arm into buying it. I think what they forget to realize is if they're not honest in their presentation of the car you go to look at, it's going to make you upset, and you're probably less likely to buy the car. So in question 7, I asked the owner, I said, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like brand new in the showroom at the dealership, how would you rate the condition of the body and paint? And then I wait for their reply. Now, if they take too long to answer, then I'm going to question the validity of the answer. And if someone is really assured of the condition of the car, they might come back and say it's an 8. It's really nice. It's an 8 or a 9. And they come back with a question and say, okay, well, it's probably about a 7. Okay, that kind of tells you that it's not perfect, but it doesn't really give you the information you really need. So the second question to that question is, can you please tell me, what would it take to bring that car up from a 7 to a 10? And it's hopefully there that they'll get you to say, well, there's a dent in the right door, and I've got some bad paint chips on the hood. And so they're going to maybe tell you some of those key things that you want to know just to get a general idea of the condition of the car. So once I talk about the body and paint, I move on to question number 8, which is, can you please tell me on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like brand new at the dealership, what is the condition of the interior? And they might come back and say, well, it's a 6, the carpets are dirty, the seats are dirty, and so on. Or they might say, man, this is a 10. And if they're very confident and they answer very quickly, from my experiences, I have found that that's generally going to be true because they're very confident of the condition of their car. Then on question 9, I move on to the mechanical, once again asking on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like brand new, how would you rate the condition of the engine and the mechanical components of the car? And if they rate that, less than 9, well, even at 9, then you would say, once again, can you please tell me, in your estimation, what would it take, if I buy this car from you, what would it take to go through the car and bring it up to 10, being like brand new? And hopefully they say, well, yeah, the brakes are kind of worn, or the shocks, the mechanic told me the shocks need replaced, and so on. And so with those 3 questions, hopefully, I'm going to say hopefully, you can get the information out of them to really get a good idea of the condition of that car before you run off on a 3-hour drive. Once again, I have been discouraged so many times, and I know other people I have talked to have had the same problem, going out and looking at a used car. Okay, those are the key questions that you want to ask. Then you're going to have to make the decision, hey, I want to go look at this car. If you feel comfortable, it's worth the effort to go look at this car, then you're going to want to know what to look at that first walk around and that first test drive. And I will cover that in the next part in this video series. Oh, you're probably thinking, hey Kent, what about question number 10? Well, I like to leave question number 10 open for you to decide what you'd like to ask. It may depend upon the type of car or the model year that you're looking for. But I personally like to finalize the questions with, can you tell me if your price is negotiable? Now, that's a little tough question. A lot of people get upset and they say, well, you haven't even seen the car. Why do you want to negotiate? I like to know kind of their general attitude towards negotiation before I go there, particularly if they're asking more for the car than I'm willing to pay, and I have to drive an hour or longer to go see it. I would at least like to know if their price is negotiable. If not, then I may not even take the time to go look at it, because if they're asking $10,000 for the car and I want to only pay 8. I need to get some sort of feel there about, how quickly they need to sell the car or how negotiable the price is. Sometimes, by the way, you may have to follow a car for a month. You'll see these cars come up. It's usually the really nice ones, and it's worth following, where you'll see it come up and they'll be asking $12,000. You'll say, wow, that's like $2,000 or $3,000 over market value. But you read that and you say, well, this car only has 86,000 miles on it, one owner, maintenance records. That's the kind of car you want. But maybe you don't want to spend $12,000, and you may be thinking, well, nobody else is going to spend $10,000 or $12,000. So wait, be patient. Sometimes those cars will show up again a month later for sale at $10,000, and you follow them a little bit. Maybe they'll drop to $9,000, and then it's time to go look at the car. This recently happened to me with a 210 chassis E320 wagon 4MATIC. That had a transmission problem. I thought this would be a great car to get, only 130,000 miles, had all the maintenance records, second owner, but the transmission was malfunctioning and they were going to sell it. Well, they started out with a very high price. Nobody's going to buy it if it's got a bad transmission for, close to wholesale value. Well, sure enough, 3 weeks later, the price was down $1,000. And then I went and looked at the car, and I said, well, it's probably going to need a little, I'm taking a risk here, so I offered them $1,000 less than they were asking, and we were able to raise the price a little bit and close the deal. But it took some patience, waiting over a month, following the car, and then watching that price get closer to reality. So don't be afraid to ask them if their price is negotiable. And in fact, in a future video, I will talk about the art of negotiation and how you can actually go out and negotiate good prices on these cars. I think you'll find that video interesting as well.